The text comes in at 2:47 in the morning. Not from Amber. From one of the bridesmaids. A woman Sarah has known for 6 years. A woman who stood beside her at her own mother's funeral. The text is 4 words. Don't come to the wedding. Sarah reads it 3 times. Then she sets a phone face down on the nightstand and stares at the ceiling in the dark. 6 weeks ago, she told Amber the truth. 6 weeks ago, she sat across from her best friend of 14 years in a quiet corner booth of a restaurant they'd been going to since they were 22, and she said, "I need to tell you something I saw at your bachelorette party, and I need you to hear me." Amber heard her, and then Amber told her she was lying. This is not the story of a woman who stuck her nose somewhere it didn't belong. Sarah didn't go looking for what she saw. She didn't seek it out, didn't engineer a situation, didn't arrive at the bachelorette weekend with any agenda. What she saw because she happened to be in the wrong hallway at the wrong moment. And because some things, once seen, cannot be unseen, no matter how much everyone involved would prefer that you try. But before we get to what Sarah saw, you need to understand who Amber is. Amber and Sarah met in a college dorm hallway at 19, bonded over a broken printer and a shared deadline, and had been more or less inseparable for the 14 years since. They were the kind of friends who finished each other's sentences, not because they'd rehearsed it, but because they'd spent enough time together that the gap between thinking and speaking had simply collapsed. They had a standing Tuesday dinner. They had a shared note on their phones called Things to Discuss that was updated constantly and contained, at any given moment, somewhere between 12 and 40 items. When Amber got engaged to Kieran 18 months ago, Sarah was the first person she called. Before her mother, before her sister, before anyone. That is the kind of friendship this was. Kieran is 36. He works in commercial real estate. He has a particular kind of ease, the ease of a man who has always been liked without having to work at it, for whom rooms naturally arrange themselves. Sarah had always thought he was fine. Not spectacular, not the person she would have chosen for Amber, but fine. She'd filed that reservation away 14 months ago and never mentioned it. Because that is what you do when your best friend is happy. The bachelorette weekend was in Charleston. 4 days, 10 women, a rented house with a back porch that looked out over water. It was, by any reasonable measure, a beautiful weekend. Good food, good weather, genuine laughter. Sarah was present and warm, and she meant it. On the 3rd night, around 11, she slipped away from the group to get her phone charger from her room. The house had 2 staircases. She took the back one, the one that ran past the small sitting room on the 2nd floor that no one had been using. The door was half open. She wasn't meant to see anything. She was walking past. But the light from a phone screen caught her attention. Or maybe it was a sound. And she paused for just a second. Not even long enough to register what was happening before she understood exactly what was happening. Kieran was in that room. He wasn't alone. Sarah walked back downstairs. She sat on the back porch by herself for 45 minutes. She listened to the water. She thought about what she'd seen, what it meant, and what it would cost her to say something, and what it would cost her to say nothing. She already knew, standing on that porch, that there was no version of this that didn't hurt someone. The question was only who. And she already knew, standing on that porch, that she was going to tell Amber. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have prepared for, was that Amber's first response, before the shock, before the grief, before anything that resembled processing, was going to be, "That's not possible. You're mistaken. You need to look at what you're doing here." But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we get to that conversation, there's something you need to understand about the woman who was in that room with Kieran. Because this isn't just a story about a groom who made a choice on a back staircase. This is a story about what it looks like when someone's entire social world is invested in a version of events. and what happens when one person refuses to agree that she didn't see what she saw. The woman's name is Ingrid. Sarah doesn't know her well. They've met twice, maybe 3 times, at events where Kieran brought colleagues. She's in marketing at his firm. 31, maybe 32. She'd been at the bachelorette house for exactly 1 night before driving back early, citing a family obligation. Sarah had thought nothing of it at the time. Now she's sitting across from Amber in their booth at the restaurant. The same booth they've occupied for a decade, the one by the window where the afternoon light comes in sideways. And she's watching Amber's face move through a series of expressions that don't settle into any one of them. She tells her everything. She doesn't perform certainty she doesn't have. She doesn't dramatize. She lays it out exactly as she saw it. The hallway, the light, the half-open door. And then she stops talking, and she waits. Amber is quiet for a long time, and then she says, "That's not what you saw." Not, "Are you sure?" Not, "Tell me again." Not even, "That can't be right." What she says is, "That's not what you saw." As though the question isn't whether Sarah is telling the truth, but whether Sarah has the authority to accurately report her own experience. Sarah tries again, gently. She says she knows this is a lot. She says she wouldn't be bringing it to her if she weren't certain. She says she would never. Amber cuts her off. "You've never liked Kieran." That is the moment. Not the accusation itself, but how quickly it arrives. Sarah has been sitting with this for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of wait, 3 weeks of back and forth, 3 weeks of being absolutely certain, and then afraid she was wrong, and then absolutely certain again. And Amber's explanation for why Sarah would fabricate or misread something like this arrives in under a minute. "You've never liked Kieran." Sarah doesn't say what she's thinking, which is, liking Kieran has nothing to do with what she saw in that room. Instead, she asks Amber if she's going to say anything to him. She asks carefully, the way you ask a question when you already suspect the answer is going to cost you something. Amber says she'll talk to him. She says she's sure there's an explanation. She says to give her a few days. Sarah gives her a few days, then a week, then 10 days. Then she gets a call from Amber's sister telling her that Amber has spoken to Kieran, that Kieran has denied everything, and that the family would appreciate it if Sarah kept her distance from the wedding preparations while this is sorted out. Not from Amber, from Amber's sister. This is the part where most people fold, where most people send a long message that isn't really an apology, but functions like one. A message that walks back the edges of what they said, softens the certainty, creates just enough room for plausible deniability. Most people, when faced with the full social weight of a wedding bearing down on them, find a way to make themselves smaller. Sarah doesn't do that. She sends one message to Amber. It says, "I love you. I know what I saw. I'm here whenever you need me." And then she waits. What happens next is swift and thorough. Over the following 2 weeks, she is quietly removed from the bridesmaid group chat. Her dress fitting is canceled by the bridal boutique with a brief administrative email. The maid of honor, a woman named Tilda, who Sarah has been close to for almost as long as she's known Amber, stops responding. Not an argument, not a confrontation, just absence. The social infrastructure of this friendship simply reconfigures around her removal, the way a puzzle rearranges itself when you take out a piece. If you've ever watched a group of people decide what to believe, you know how little discussion it requires. It is less a decision than a weather system, something that forms and moves without anyone declaring it out loud. And somewhere in all of this, Kieran is still in the house, still planning a honeymoon, still doing what people do when they have calculated, correctly, that the people around them will choose comfort over truth. He's right, too. For now. If you've ever been this person, the one who told the truth and watched it get quietly buried, hit subscribe. Because Wet Teddy is the channel where we don't look away. And that detail, the canceled dress fitting, the one that looks like an administrative note, is the one that makes everything else make sense. The wedding happens on a Saturday in April. Sarah isn't there. She knows it's happening because the photos appear on her phone the way they always do now. In stories, in real time, in the background of other people's weekends. She sees the venue, the flowers. She sees Amber's face, lit up and certain the way it gets when she has decided something, and the deciding feels like peace. Sarah puts her phone down. She makes tea. She does not allow herself to wonder whether she made the right call. She already knows she did. The months that follow are quiet. Amber and Kieran go to Portugal for 3 weeks. They come back tan and, by all appearances, settled. Tilda posts a photo of the 4 of them at dinner, 6 weeks after the wedding. Everyone is smiling. Kieran has his arm around Amber. It looks like a life. Sarah watches it from the distance of someone who used to be included. She doesn't reach out. Not because she's hardened, but because she made a promise to herself the night she got that 4-word text. She would not chase. She would not perform remorse for something she had done right. If Amber wanted to find her, she knew exactly where she was. What Sarah doesn't know, what she can't know yet, is that somewhere in those first months after the wedding, Amber starts to notice things. Small things at first. The way Kieran keeps his phone angled away from her on the couch. The way certain work calls happen in the car after he's already home. Parked in the driveway for 20 minutes before he comes inside. The way he mentions Ingrid's name in conversation, casually, just often enough that commenting on it would feel strange, and then stops mentioning it entirely around month 3. Amber notices. And she does what people do when they notice something they are not yet ready to name. She files it. She adds it to the internal record she is not yet consciously keeping. She tells herself she's tired. She tells herself paranoia is what happens when someone plants a story in your head. She tells herself that for 4 months. Then a woman in Kieran's office goes on maternity leave. The coverage requires reshuffling. Ingrid, who has been in a different department, moves into the project Kieran leads. They begin traveling together for client presentations. Twice to Chicago, once to Atlanta. Amber knows this because Kieran tells her. Casually. Over dinner. With eye contact and the particular reasonableness of a man who has decided his best defense is transparency about the facts that don't matter. What he doesn't tell her, that Ingrid has had his personal number since before the bachelorette weekend. What Amber discovers, not because she goes looking, but because a thread loads wrong on a shared laptop and she sees the preview before she can stop herself, is that the message history between them is not new. It is not new at all. She sits with that for 3 days. She doesn't confront him. She doesn't call her sister. She just carries it, the way you carry something when you don't yet know its weight and you're afraid to set it down and find out. And then she starts thinking about what Sarah told her. She tries to remember the conversation exactly. The restaurant, the booth, the afternoon light. She tries to remember whether Sarah had seemed calculating or whether she had seemed pained. She tries to remember whether Sarah had pushed her toward a conclusion or whether she had simply laid something down and waited. She remembers that Sarah had waited. She also remembers what she said in response. That's not what you saw. She remembers how fast she said it. She remembers that she hadn't asked a single clarifying question. She remembers that the speed of her own certainty had surprised even her in the moment, and that she'd told herself it was because she knew Kieran, that she knew the truth of her own relationship. She's starting to wonder if what she actually knew was that she wasn't ready to find out. Tell me something in the comments. If your closest friend brought you something like this about your partner, what would you do first? Ask questions? Or protect what you'd already decided was true? I'm asking because this story turns on exactly that. That split second. That first instinct. But hold on to what Amber just found on that laptop, because she's not done looking. By October, 7 months after the wedding, Amber has started doing something she would not yet describe as investigating. She would call it organizing her thoughts, trying to make sense of a feeling. She would not call it what it is, which is that she has opened a door in her own mind and is standing in the room behind it, and the room is full. She goes back through the laptop, not frantically, carefully. The way someone searches when they already know what they're going to find and are building the nerve to actually find it. Message threads, app download history, the camera roll on a cloud backup that still has both their accounts linked from a phone Kieran upgraded 18 months ago. She doesn't find the photos yet, but she finds something else. A restaurant reservation. Chicago, a Tuesday in September, for 2, under Kieran's name. She finds it in the shared email account they use for subscriptions and deliveries, the one neither of them thinks of as private anymore. The receipt is there because Kieran has his work card statements forwarded to that account. He was in Chicago for 2 nights that week. He told Amber he ate alone both nights, room service the first, a client dinner the second. The reservation is for Tuesday. The client dinner was Wednesday. Amber stares at the receipt for a long time. She screenshots it and puts it in a folder she creates and names, with a particular kind of dark practicality: house docs. She doesn't confront him. She has thought about it, the moment of laying it out and watching his face, and she keeps arriving at the same conclusion. She is not ready to have that conversation until she cannot be talked out of what she knows. Kieran is persuasive. He has always been persuasive. He has a way of taking the air out of an argument before you've finished making it, of turning certainty into something that sounds, by the end, like insecurity. She needs more than a receipt. She knows that. So she keeps her face normal, makes dinner, asks about his day, laughs at the right moments. She is so good at it that she frightens herself a little. Then she calls one of the women from The Bachelorette, not Tilda, too close to the center. She calls Faye, someone on the edges of the group, no particular loyalty to the narrative that formed afterward. She keeps it casual. Says she's been thinking about the Charleston house, that she'd love to rent it again for a girls' weekend. She asks if Faye remembers anything odd about the trip, the layout, noise issues, anything like that. Faye pauses for just a beat too long before she answers. She says no, she doesn't remember anything odd. The house was beautiful. And then, very carefully, "Amber, are you okay?" Not, "Why are you asking?" Not, "What do you mean odd?" She asks if Amber is okay, with the specific gentleness of someone who already knows the answer and is terrified of the question that got them here. Amber says she's fine, gets off the call, sits in her car in the parking garage for 11 minutes. She knows now that someone else at that bachelorette weekend saw something, or heard something, or knows something. Faye's pause, that half-second of recalibration, is not nothing. That is the pause of a woman deciding how much to say. Which means Sarah was not the only one. Which means this was not a story Sarah invented out of jealousy or misread in a hallway. It was something that happened, something witnessed, something that has been quietly living in the margins of this marriage since before the vows were spoken. Amber drives home, makes dinner, pours 2 glasses of wine, watches Kieran across the table and feels something shift in her. Not grief yet, not fury yet, something quieter and more permanent. The particular feeling of a door closing on a version of things you believed were real. She doesn't know yet that by the end of the week, she won't need Faye to confirm anything. She doesn't know yet about the photos. 3 days after the call with Faye, Amber is at work when her phone buzzes. A message, no text, just a photo. Then another. Then 3 more in quick succession, each one landing with the particular weight of something that has been held a long time. Faye's message, when it finally comes, is 6 words. "I should have sent these sooner." The photos are from the bachelorette weekend. Candid shots, the kind that accumulate during a group trip, taken without agenda, the visual texture of a weekend that was supposed to be uncomplicated. Faye had been wandering the house on the third night with a glass of wine, photographing the light off the water, the group on the back porch. The first 3 photos are exactly what they look like. A beautiful house, good light, the kind of images you caption simply and forget. The fourth one is taken in the upstairs hallway. Faye had been walking toward her room. She'd photographed the warm spill of light at the end of the corridor, the way it lit the wooden floor, the half-open door of the sitting room. It is, technically, a beautiful photograph. The kind of incidental image that arrives when you're not thinking about what you're pointing at. Through the half-open door, visible, unmistakable, requiring no explanation, are 2 figures. Amber knows immediately. She doesn't need to enlarge it. She doesn't need the timestamp, though it's there. She looks at this photograph for perhaps 4 seconds. And in those 4 seconds, 14 months of marriage, 4 months of deliberate not knowing, and 1 conversation in a restaurant booth that she ended with that's not what you saw, all arrive in the same place at the same time. She puts her phone face down on her desk, sits completely still for a moment that has no real duration. Then she picks it back up, and she calls Sarah. Sarah answers on the second ring. She doesn't know what's coming. Why would she? It's been 7 months of silence. She says hello the way you say it when you're not sure which version of a conversation you're about to have. Amber says her name. Just that. Just Sarah. And Sarah, who has known Amber for 14 years, who can read the specific register of her voice the way you can only read someone you've loved a long time, says, "I know. I'm here." They are on the phone for 47 minutes. Amber talks. Sarah listens. Sarah does not say "I told you so." Not because she's performing graciousness, but because she has never once believed that phrase is what the moment needs, and she knows Amber well enough to know it especially isn't now. She asks questions. She lets the silences exist. She is, in this phone call, exactly who she has always been. The person who, when you finally describe the thing that happened, doesn't say, "Are you sure?" She says, "I know exactly what that is." What Amber has to reckon with, and she knows this, she is already reckoning with it, is not just Kieran. It is the 7 months, the 4-word text, the friends who arranged themselves around a version of events that was more convenient than true, the dress fitting canceled like an appointment and not like the end of a 14-year friendship. She chose that, not maliciously. She chose it because choosing otherwise would have required looking at something she was not ready to look at. But she chose it. The mirror does not let you off that hook. It holds it steady until you see clearly. Kieran is oblivious to all of this. He comes home that evening to a wife who makes dinner and asks about his day and says almost nothing unusual. He does not notice the folder on her laptop, now containing 12 items. He does not notice that she spoke to a solicitor that afternoon. A 15-minute call, nothing committed, just information. He does not notice that the quality of the silence in the house has changed in a way that is not yet visible, but is already permanent. He pours himself a glass of wine. He asks what she wants to watch. She names something. She sits beside him on the couch. She is calm with the particular calm of someone who has already made a decision and is simply waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. The moment comes sooner than he expects. The moment comes on a Thursday evening, 11 days after Faye's photos. Amber doesn't do it dramatically. She waits until dinner is finished and the kitchen is clean. She will remember this detail later, that she did the dishes first. And then she sits across from Kieran at the table with her hands folded and says, "I need to show you something." She slides her phone across the table. The photo. Kieran looks at it, and in the 3 seconds before he speaks, Amber watches his face move through its calculations. She can see it. The assessment of what she knows versus what she can be persuaded to doubt. The architecture of a response that will take her certainty and redirect it back at her own insecurity. He says, "It's not what it looks like." He says Ingrid was upset that night about something personal and he'd gone to find her. He says he should have mentioned it. He knows that, and he's sorry he didn't, but it was genuinely nothing and he needs her to trust him. Amber listens to the whole thing. Then she opens the folder. She walks him through it. The message history, the restaurant reservation, the timestamp on the photo, the fact that Faye, who has known Kieran for 3 years, who was a guest at their wedding, has known about this since Charleston and found after 7 months that she could no longer stay quiet. Kieran stops talking somewhere around the restaurant receipt. He doesn't offer another explanation. He just goes quiet in the way people go quiet when they have run out of architecture and there is nothing left to build. They are separated by the end of the month. It is not loud. No dramatic scene beyond that Thursday table. The lawyers handle most of it. What Amber remembers most, what she tells Sarah later, during one of the Tuesday dinners they quietly reinstate, is how small it all felt once the pretending stopped. How much energy she had been spending maintaining a version of reality that required her to look past things directly in front of her. How much lighter everything became when she stopped. Sarah comes back slowly. There is no grand reconciliation, no tearful doorstep moment. It happens the way real repairs tend to happen, in increments, in reinstated Tuesdays, and small caught-up texts, and one afternoon where they sit in Amber's car outside the restaurant for 20 minutes, making their way back to each other without announcing that they're doing it. What Amber eventually says, in one of those increments, is this: "I knew. Not consciously, but somewhere. And the easier thing was to make it your problem." Sarah doesn't argue with that. She doesn't rush to absolve her. She just nods, because this is what they do now. They look at things directly. Here is what I want you to take from this. Not that betrayal is everywhere, or that trust is foolish. The thing I want you to hold is this. The most powerful thing Kieran had in that house was not Amber's love for him. It was her fear of what she would have to face if that love turned out to be built on something false. Fear of the truth is a tool, and some people are extraordinarily skilled at sensing it and working with it. They don't need you to be naive. They just need you to have something to lose. The moment Amber stopped protecting that, the moment the cost of knowing became less than the cost of not knowing, was the moment it was already over. Sarah told her the truth once, clearly at real cost, and then she waited. And she was still there when Amber found her way back. That is the whole story. If this one landed somewhere real, the waiting, the choosing what to believe, the friend who stayed anyway, the next video is right there. It's about a woman who spent 3 years making herself smaller for someone who was betting she would stay that way. She didn't. I think you need to see it. Wet Teddy. Every story, slowed down until it makes sense. I'll see you in the next one.